Well, iconic baking brand Ernest Adams is no longer. It's been quietly deleted after 90 years of providing slices, cakes, loaves and sponges, and it leaves a giant hole in our pantries and in our lunchboxes, having occupied a really special place in our culinary repertoire for generations.
For much of the 20th century, two bakery brands quietly became part of everyday life in New Zealand. One was known for savoury pies, the other for cakes, slices, and sweet baked treats. Irvine's and Ernest Adams. For decades, their products appeared in supermarket aisles, dairy fridges, school lunchboxes, and family gatherings across the country. Yet, despite their long histories, both brands eventually disappeared within a year of each other. Their stories begin more than a century ago. The origins of Irvine's pies can be traced to 1917, when Albert William Irvine began producing pies in New Zealand. Albert Irvine had been born in Ipswich, Queensland in 1883 and moved across the Tasman to Auckland in 1906. After working in several trades, including advertising and poultry farming, he eventually entered the baking business. At the time, meat pies were already becoming an everyday food in New Zealand. Introduced by British settlers during the 19th century, pies gradually evolved into a distinctly local staple. Simple fillings such as minced beef, steak, or bacon and egg were baked inside pastry and sold as a hot portable meal. By the early 20th century, they had become popular with workers and travellers who needed something filling, affordable, and easy to eat. Irvine's built its reputation on exactly that. The company produced traditional savoury pies using local ingredients and gradually expanded production as demand grew. Over time, one flavour in particular became closely associated with New Zealand pie culture: mince and cheese, a combination widely regarded as a Kiwi invention. While Irvine's focused on savoury pies, another bakery business was developing on the opposite side of the country. The brand that would become Ernest Adams began with an English baker seeking a fresh start. Ernest Alfred Adams was born in Somerset, England in 1892 into a family of bakers. After learning the trade from his father, he emigrated to Australia in 1912. But his early adult life was marked by personal tragedy. His first wife and second son both died during childbirth. In 1921, Adams moved again, this time to Christchurch, New Zealand, hoping to rebuild his life. There he partnered with an elderly baker named Hugh Bruce, forming a company called Adams Bruce Limited. The business focused on cakes, fruit loaves, pastries, and slices, baked goods that reflected traditional English recipes but adapted to New Zealand tastes. By 1929, the company had been reorganised as Ernest Adams Limited. From that point onward, the brand began to grow steadily. While Irvine's pies filled dairy pie warmers and takeaway cabinets, Ernest Adams products became associated with sweet treats, items like sponge cakes, fruit slices, and festive mince pies. By the 1930s, the company had expanded into multiple cities, with bakeries operating in Auckland, Wellington, Christchurch, and Dunedin. Despite the economic pressure of the Great Depression, the business survived. Ernest Adams reportedly reduced his own salary in order to keep staff employed, while expanding advertising through newspapers and radio. Over time, the company diversified into other products, including confectionery under the Queen Anne label. Meanwhile, Irvine's continued expanding its pie production as meat pies became deeply embedded in New Zealand food culture. By the mid-20th century, pies could be found almost everywhere, in dairies, petrol stations, sports grounds, and school tuck shops. Irvine's became one of the brands helping move pie production from small bakery kitchens to large-scale manufacturing. Through the 1960s and 1970s, New Zealand experienced a surge in pie consumption. The most ambitious attempt to capitalise on this was Georgie Pie, launched in 1977 as a fast food chain built entirely around pies. Georgie Pie attempted to create a distinctly New Zealand alternative to American burger chains, but it ultimately struggled to compete with expanding global brands such as McDonald's. The chain was eventually purchased and closed during the 1990s. Ironically, the factory once used by Georgie Pie would later become part of Irvine's production network. By the late 20th century, both Irvine's and Ernest Adams had become household names. Irvine's pies were widely sold as affordable everyday meals. Ernest Adams products filled supermarket shelves with cakes, slices, and other baked sweets. But the companies themselves were also changing. Both brands eventually became part of Goodman Fielder, one of the largest food manufacturers operating across Australia and New Zealand. Under corporate ownership, production scaled up significantly. Irvine's pies were manufactured at large facilities, including a major plant in Wiri, South Auckland. Ernest Adams products were produced in similarly large-scale operations designed for supermarket distribution. By the early 2000s, both brands had become part of a much larger international supply chain. Goodman Fielder itself would later be linked to global agribusiness interests, including Wilmar International. For many consumers, however, the brands still felt familiar and local. Irvine's remained a common sight in dairy pie warmers and supermarket freezers. Ernest Adams slices and cakes continued appearing in lunchboxes, afternoon teas, and holiday gatherings. But by the 2000s, the market for packaged baked goods had begun to change. Independent bakeries were gaining popularity again, offering fresh products and premium ingredients. At the same time, consumer preferences were shifting toward foods perceived as less processed. The COVID-19 pandemic added additional strain to large food manufacturers, disrupting ingredient supplies and increasing production costs.
No, look, essentially what's happened is it's post-COVID, people are baking more. So in actual fact, they're still continuing, maybe not with the bread so much, but certainly with the cakes and slices. So number one, people are baking more, so they're less likely to go in and buy the Ernest Adams slice that was there. And the other interesting thing the Ernest Adams people said was that people's diets have changed. So now, friends who are allergic to nuts, they're allergic to this, they're on a keto diet, they're on these different things, so they therefore don't necessarily want those traditional things that the Ernest Adams brand is well known for.
In 2022, Ernest Adams products quietly disappeared from supermarket shelves after Goodman Fielder discontinued the brand. The decision was not widely announced at the time, and many consumers only realised what had happened when the products simply stopped appearing in stores. A year later, a similar announcement followed for Irvine's. In March 2023, Goodman Fielder confirmed that Irvine's pies, along with another brand called Mackenzie, would be discontinued. Production ended later that year, resulting in around 90 job losses at facilities in Palmerston North and Oamaru. By then, Irvine's had existed for more than a century. Ernest Adams had lasted more than 90 years. Both brands had begun as small bakery operations built by individual entrepreneurs. One an Australian migrant producing savory pies, the other an English baker rebuilding his life through cakes and pastries. Over time, they became national brands, and eventually they became part of multinational food companies. Their disappearance reflects broader changes in the modern food industry, where rising costs, shifting consumer habits, and global supply chains increasingly determine which products remain on supermarket shelves. Today, New Zealanders still eat large numbers of pies, cakes, and slices every year. The foods themselves have not disappeared, but the brands that once defined them for generations of shoppers have quietly faded into history. So, what do you think? Ever wonder why Ernest Adams or Irvine pies were no longer sold at your local supermarket? Was the reason exactly what you thought it would be? Let us know in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this video, subscribe, and as always, stay curious.